I love talking about what's actually happening in the demography of this country with Bernard Salt, who writes for The Australian and commentates around the place. Great to talk to you again, Bernard. For the first time, I think, certainly in my life, and I've been looking at budgets, state and federal, for a long, long while, to me, it wasn't the dollars and cents and policies that really was the big takeout from the budget, but is the revelation that for the first time since the Second World War, at least, our population is not going to grow. We're going to be in net losing numbers overseas rather than welcoming more people in. Just how historic is this shift?
Well, there's no doubt that this is an historic shift, and I know other people are focused on the dollars and so forth, the budget, but I always go straight to the demographic assumptions in the budget papers. And I was able to get access to the data behind this chart, which hopefully we can put up, which shows the significance of this. This chart shows the net addition and contraction from the Australian continent. So the inflow and outflow of people to the Australian continent in net terms every year since Federation, 1901 on the left, and a few years into the future on the right. And you can see the dip around 2021, 2022, where we're expected to have more Australians or more people leaving Australia than arriving in Australia. And you look back in time, you have to go back to 1946 to see another time in history when more people left Australia than arrived in Australia. And I thought this was quite funny. What happened in 1946? We weren't losing migrants or gaining migrants at that time. I suspect that is troop movements. That might be the Americans going back to America. This is not residents. This is people who are based on the Australian continent. So it can include, in the modern sense, it can be foreign students that are here for 13 months or so, or backpackers that are here for an extended period of time. It's long-term residents as opposed to citizens of Australia. And that outflow, I suspect, is foreign students going home, backpackers going home, expats going home, and the movement back to other countries must be greater than the number of Australians living overseas coming back to Australia by a significant number.
Yeah, look, when you're talking about 1946, as you say, American troops, some of them going back home also with brides from Australia, so that might have exacerbated it. But when we look at that graph, if we can get it up again, it really amplifies the point, because apart from the Second World War, then the other time we dipped down was during the Depression in the 30s, and then, of course, the First World War. So it just shows... That's
troop movements as well. That is the diggers going to the Western Front and to Gallipoli.
Exactly. So what is this going to do to us in terms of our population growth and our demographic mix?
Well, this is a significant issue. Rightly or wrongly, for good or ill, the Australian economy has been based, particularly over the last decade or so, on strong levels of overseas immigration, and also added to that mix is high levels of foreign students. And that componentry, the net overseas migration, has contributed anywhere between 180 and 220,000 people per year. Take that away and, in fact, actually contract the population, and it has a big impact on the demand for housing and the demand for rental accommodation, the demand for student accommodation. And, you know, if you were to do that gradually over a decade or so, that would be, I suppose you could manage it. But if you just cut and have this deep cut in 1 year, then it really will cause an issue. As an example, I think that Melbourne added about 100,000 people last financial year, roughly 100,000 people. I think that, taking into account the inflows, the outflows and so forth, interstate migration, Melbourne's rate of growth will drop. It won't go negative, Melbourne won't contract, but it might go back to, say, 40,000 people, because about 30,000 added through natural increase. That's the order of magnitude. But if you take Melbourne's growth from 100,000 to 40,000 in 12 months, then that has a sort of a jolting impact on the demand for housing and labour. Plumbers, electricians, carpenters, builders are all immediately affected by that shock, if you like.
Yeah, it's a hell of a worry, and it's going to change. A lot of people will welcome it. People have been worried about our population growth or immigration. But I saw some numbers saying that with both Sydney and Melbourne, on the projections pre-COVID, they'd been expected each to grow by about another 400,000 people over the next 5 or 6 years. Now they're not expected to grow by much at all. That's the quantum of the shift. Will we expect to see some of that growth happen in regional Australia, or will it just not happen at all?
No, I do. I think that there is going to be a movement of people from the major cities, Melbourne, Sydney in particular, to the regions. Not at the moment because people can't leave Melbourne. But I would be very surprised if there isn't an outflow from Sydney at the moment. This occurred at the 91-92 recession. There was an exodus, particularly from Victoria, and an exodus from Melbourne. So in tough times, people seek opportunities interstate, or they seek a lower cost of living, if you like, in lifestyle regions. The difference now is that there is a propellant behind people, and that propellant is that people can actually work from home. The whole work from home option makes living in a sea change or tree change community very attractive, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is this something we should just accept, or should the federal government be doing all it can to accelerate or streamline quarantine and testing procedures so that if people do want to come here, we can safely bring them to Australia?
Well, I think that we as a community and as an economy, you just cannot let go the tourism sector. You just cannot let go the foreign student sector. That contributes $35 billion a year alone to the Australian economy. So I think that what we should be doing is focusing on ways to safely, COVID safely, introduce or reintroduce certainly students, or get the Australians back home for a start.
Yep.
Then focus on foreign students. Then focus on ways that you can introduce overseas visitors to Australia. Surely you can take a COVID test, a saliva test or something like that before you get on a plane overseas, and then be tested again when you get into Australia. There must be ways in which you can manage that, or manage the risk to people wanting to come and go from the Australian economy and continent.
I completely agree with you there. You won't be able to completely eliminate the risk, but you dramatically reduce the risk. And when it's compared to the cost benefit, it's where we need to go. Hopefully, we'll talk to some government officials about that in the days and weeks to come. Thanks for joining us again, Bernard. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Bernard Salt there. You can read him in The Australian, the demographer, the leading demographer in this nation when it comes to this sort of commentary. Just historic changes we are about to see. We are seeing now as we stop growing as a country, net migration going into flat or negative terms.